If you can't trust me spending time with Shane rebuilding our friendship, maybe this relationship isn't meant to be. Those words hit me like a wrench to the gut, delivered with such casual finality that I almost couldn't process what Sierra had just said. We'd been together for 4 years, building what I thought was a solid foundation here in Phoenix, and now she was essentially telling me to accept her weekly rock climbing sessions with her ex-boyfriend Shane or walk away from everything we'd built together. I'm Brooks, 33, and I run my own HVAC contracting business here in the Valley. Been working with my hands since I was 18, building something real while most guys my age were still figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. I'm the type of guy who believes in fixing things instead of throwing them away when they get complicated. When a system breaks down, you diagnose the problem, you get the right parts, and you make it work better than before. I'm methodical by nature, someone who looks at airflow patterns and electrical circuits and draws logical conclusions. But I'm also the kind of person who values loyalty and expects the same in return. For the past 4 years, Sierra and I had been talking about marriage, about buying one of those newer houses in Scottsdale, with the big garages where I could expand my business, about the kind of future that requires 2 people who actually trust each other. We'd even started looking at rings together last Christmas, discussing settings and styles during those perfect Phoenix winter evenings, when the temperature drops just enough to make you appreciate having someone warm next to you. I'd been saving money from every commercial job, planning to propose by our 5th anniversary. Sierra knew about the ring fund because I'm not the type to hide financial decisions from someone I'm building a life with. Then Shane came back from his military deployment 3 months ago, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about our relationship started unraveling like a poorly wired electrical panel. The rock climbing lessons started innocently enough. Or at least that's how Sierra presented them to me. Shane was struggling with his transition back to civilian life, she explained, and these outdoor sessions every Saturday were helping him cope with what she called his post-deployment adjustment issues. She painted herself as this compassionate friend who was simply being there for someone who needed support during a difficult time, someone who understood the challenges of readjusting to normal life after months of military structure and stress. According to Sierra, these climbing sessions were part of an adventure therapy program specifically designed for veterans dealing with PTSD and adjustment disorders. She made it sound like a professional, structured environment with multiple participants and certified instructors. When I suggested maybe I could join them sometime, thinking it might be nice to learn a new skill while supporting Shane's recovery, or that perhaps Shane should consider professional therapy instead of leaning on my girlfriend for emotional support, Sierra would get defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive of veterans' mental health struggles. She'd lecture me about how important it was to be there for people who'd served our country, as if I hadn't been the one encouraging her to maintain friendships and support systems throughout our entire relationship. What really bothered me wasn't just the time she was spending with Shane, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way she seemed to light up when she talked about their climbing sessions, the way she'd spend extra time getting ready for them, selecting athletic wear with the same care she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners, the way she'd come home glowing and energized in a way she hadn't been with me in months. She described their roots in detail, how Shane was such a natural climber despite never having touched rock before his deployment, how he had these strong, steady hands that could find holds she couldn't even see, how they'd lost track of time working their way up challenging faces while the Arizona sun painted the mountains in colors that made everything feel magical. The way she talked about his technique, his patience as an instructor, his ability to make her feel safe on difficult routes. She'd show me photos of their climbing gear with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new passion, but never seemed interested in sharing that passion with me. Meanwhile, our own weekend plans became secondary to her Saturday climbing schedule, and she'd often return from these sessions too tired for the dinner dates or activities we'd previously enjoyed together, claiming the physical exertion was more demanding than she'd expected, and she needed quiet time to recover from the intensity of the outdoor experience. Our Friday night dinners, which had been a tradition since our 2nd month together, started getting canceled because she needed to prepare mentally for her Saturday sessions. Our Sunday morning hikes, something we'd been doing together for 3 years, became impossible because she was too sore from climbing. Even our midweek movie nights got pushed aside. because she needed to research climbing techniques and study route guides for upcoming sessions. The breaking point came on a particularly hot May evening, when I finally asked her directly whether she thought it was appropriate for someone in a committed relationship to spend every single Saturday with their ex-boyfriend, especially when that person had explicitly told me they still had feelings for her before he deployed. I'd been holding this conversation inside me for weeks, analyzing every angle like a complex HVAC system, trying to find a way to express my concerns without sounding controlling or insecure. But the words finally spilled out during what should have been a peaceful dinner at home, after I'd spent 10 hours installing a new commercial unit in 100-degree heat. My hands were still stained with refrigerant, and my back ached from crawling through tight spaces all day. But I was ready to have an honest conversation about our relationship and where we were heading. That's when she delivered her ultimatum with such cold certainty that I realized she'd probably been building up to this moment for weeks, maybe even rehearsing the exact phrasing in her mind. She stood there in our kitchen, arms crossed, telling me that if I couldn't trust her to maintain a friendship with someone who meant a lot to her, then maybe I wasn't the kind of partner she needed in her life. The way she emphasized trust made it clear that she considered my concerns to be character flaws rather than legitimate relationship issues that deserved discussion and compromise. She wasn't asking for my understanding or trying to find middle ground that would work for both of us. I looked at this woman I'd been planning to propose to, this person I'd turned down a major commercial contract in Denver to stay with because I thought we were building something permanent together, and realized that she'd already made her choice. She wasn't asking for my understanding or trying to find a compromise that would work for both of us, like scheduling climbing sessions less frequently, or including me occasionally, or setting some basic boundaries about time and emotional intimacy. She was telling me to accept a situation that made me fundamentally uncomfortable or lose her completely. The fact that she was willing to end 4 years together, rather than establish some basic boundaries with her ex-boyfriend, told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in her priorities. In her mind, Shane's need for outdoor therapy trumped my need for basic respect and consideration in our relationship. The Denver contract I'd turned down 3 months earlier had been worth 40% more than what I was making in Phoenix. Mountain State Mechanical had offered me the chance to lead HVAC installations for a new casino resort in the Rockies, specializing in high-altitude climate control systems that required advanced technical expertise. It was the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career, but I'd declined because I thought my future was here with Sierra. So I agreed with her. I told her she was absolutely right, that maybe our relationship wasn't meant to be if this was where we'd ended up after 4 years of what I thought had been mutual respect and understanding. The shock on her face was almost comical, like she'd expected me to grovel or beg her to reconsider, to accept whatever crumbs of attention she was willing to offer me between her climbing sessions with Shane. She'd probably anticipated tears, arguments, promises to be more understanding, anything except calm. Acceptance of her ultimatum. Instead, I walked into our bedroom, pulled out my phone, and called Rodriguez at Mountain State Mechanical to accept that Denver position I'd been declining for months because I thought my future was in Phoenix with her. The conversation with Rodriguez was brief and professional. They still needed someone with my experience in commercial HVAC systems, and the casino project was behind schedule. Could I start in 2 weeks? I told him I could be there Monday. The 40% salary increase meant I'd be making more money than I'd ever imagined, working on cutting-edge climate control systems in one of the most challenging environments in the country. 2 hours later, I was booking my flight and sending Sierra a photo from the departure gate at Sky Harbor, along with a simple message thanking her for helping me see things clearly. I didn't explain where I was going or why. I just left her with the same kind of casual finality she'd used when delivering her. Ultimatum about trust and climbing lessons. For 8 months, I'd been accepting Sierra's explanations about her Saturday climbing sessions with Shane, believing her when she described them as therapeutic outdoor activities, helping a struggling veteran readjust to civilian life. I trusted her completely when she talked about the climbing gym lessons, the group environment, the professional instructor who specialized in adventure therapy for people dealing with trauma. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to accept such elaborate explanations without ever questioning the details or asking to see any of the climbing gear she claimed to be learning with week after week. The truth about these so-called lessons started unraveling through casual conversations with mutual friends. The kind of innocent revelations that make you realize you've been living in a carefully constructed lie for months. It was Wesley, a guy from our hiking group, who first mentioned seeing Sierra and Shane together at a downtown coffee shop on a Sunday morning, looking very cozy and intimate for people who supposedly only met for organized climbing lessons on Saturdays. When I mentioned this to Sierra, she quickly explained that Shane had asked her to extend their sessions to include Sunday morning coffee dates where they could discuss their climbing progress and plan future routes. She made it sound perfectly reasonable, like any dedicated student would want additional time to analyze their technique development with their instructor. What she failed to mention was that these coffee dates were taking place at romantic little cafes in the Arts District, places that specialized in couples brunch menus rather than casual meetups between climbing classmates. The revelation that really shattered my trust came when I discovered through Paige, who worked at the climbing gym where Sierra claimed to attend classes, that they didn't even offer outdoor climbing instruction on Saturdays and hadn't for over 2 years due to insurance liability issues and lack of certified guides. When I pressed Paige for more details, she mentioned that the only climbing classes available were indoor wall sessions for beginners on Tuesday evenings and advanced technique workshops on Thursday afternoons for experienced climbers. This meant that for 8 months, Sierra had been lying to me about the basic premise of her entire Saturday routine, creating an elaborate fiction about climbing lessons that simply didn't exist anywhere in our city. The climbing gym Sierra claimed to attend had no record of either her or Shane ever participating in any programs. There were no Saturday outdoor sessions, no veteran therapy programs, no certified instructors specializing in adventure therapy for people with PTSD. Armed with this information, I started paying closer attention to the subtle details I'd been ignoring for months. Sierra would spend an unusual amount of time getting ready for these supposed climbing lessons, selecting athletic outfits that seemed more appropriate for photo shoots than serious outdoor activities involving rough rock faces and safety equipment. She'd wear her most expensive workout gear, style her hair with more care than she showed for her actual job at the marketing firm, and choose jewelry that she'd normally save for special occasions. When she returned from these sessions, her clothes were always pristine, never showing the telltale signs of serious rock climbing that you'd expect from someone who'd spent hours learning technique on actual mountain faces. Her hands were never scraped or chalked, her fingernails remained perfectly manicured, and she never smelled like the dusty outdoor scent that clings to people who've been scrambling on desert rock for extended periods. The Wednesday evening route planning sessions were another layer of deception that became apparent once I started questioning the logistics of her climbing education. Sierra explained these midweek meetings as necessary follow-up sessions where Shane would help her analyze the routes they'd attempted during their Saturday lessons, offering professional guidance on technique improvements and safety development. She'd return from these Wednesday sessions energized and glowing, talking enthusiastically about breakthrough moments in her climbing journey, and how Shane's expert feedback was helping her discover hidden athletic abilities she never knew she possessed. The way she described these planning sessions made them sound like intimate tutorials between a gifted instructor and his most promising student, complete with detailed discussions about hand placement, body positioning, and the mental focus required for challenging ascents. What bothered me most about these expanding sessions was how they began to dominate not just Sierra's weekend schedule, but her entire week. She'd spend Monday and Tuesday anticipating her Wednesday planning session. Wednesday evening was obviously occupied with Shane. Thursday and Friday were devoted to preparing for Saturday's lesson. And Sunday morning coffee dates meant our entire weekend revolved around her climbing schedule with her ex-boyfriend. Our own relationship became something that happened in the spaces between her outdoor pursuits with Shane, relegated to whatever time and energy she had left after fulfilling her obligations to his athletic guidance and emotional support needs. I found myself scheduling my own work around her climbing commitments, taking on evening service calls so I'd be home when she had free time, adjusting my business operations to accommodate a relationship that was increasingly one-sided. The breaking point came when I suggested joining them for one of these climbing lessons, thinking it might be interesting to learn a new skill while spending time with Sierra and supporting Shane's recovery process. I'd researched local climbing guides, found several that offered couples instruction or beginner workshops, and thought it could be a fun way to bridge the gap between my discomfort with their private sessions and my desire to be supportive of therapeutic activities. Sierra's reaction was immediate and defensive, explaining that the climbing locations were extremely technical and could only accommodate the current participants who'd been training together since the beginning of Shane's recovery program. She claimed that adding new people would disrupt the delicate therapeutic environment that had taken months to establish, and that Shane was still too emotionally fragile to handle changes in his support group dynamic. When I offered to wait for the next instruction cycle to begin, or suggested that perhaps I could observe without participating to better understand what made these sessions so beneficial for Shane's mental health, Sierra became increasingly agitated and accused me of trying to invade the safe space they'd created for his healing process. She lectured me about the importance of respecting boundaries in therapeutic relationships, insisting that my presence would undermine the trust and vulnerability that were essential components of Shane's outdoor therapy. The vehemence of her objections made it clear that my involvement in these climbing sessions was absolutely not welcome, despite her previous claims that they were innocent outdoor activities that any supportive partner should understand and appreciate. The more she talked about protecting Shane's therapeutic space, the more obvious it became that these sessions had nothing to do with group therapy or professional instruction. The final piece of evidence came when I realized that in 8 months of weekly climbing lessons and planning sessions, Sierra had never brought home a single piece of climbing gear, never displayed any outdoor equipment in our apartment, and never demonstrated any of the techniques she claimed to be learning. When I asked to see some of her gear, she explained that all student equipment had to remain with the instructor until the training program was complete, which could take several months depending on the progression schedule and the complexity of the safety certifications being pursued. This explanation might have been believable for a few weeks, but after 8 months of regular attendance, she should have had basic gear to show for her outdoor education, unless she was the world's most unsuccessful climbing student, or the lessons weren't actually focused on developing climbing skills. Professional climbing instruction requires students to gradually build their own gear collection as they advance through different skill levels. I started paying attention to other inconsistencies in her stories. She never mentioned specific routes by name, never talked about difficulty ratings, never complained about the muscle soreness that comes with serious climbing. Training. She never asked me to feel her hands for calluses or showed me bruises from learning proper falling techniques. For someone supposedly spending 8 hours a week engaged in intense physical training, she showed remarkably little evidence of athletic development. After our confrontation about trust and ultimatums, Sierra's immediate response was to prove exactly how little our 4-year relationship actually meant to her. Within hours of my departure for the airport, she was posting Instagram stories from what she claimed was Shane's climbing base camp. But the images told a completely different story than the therapeutic outdoor sessions she'd been describing to me for months. Instead of a proper outdoor climbing environment with safety equipment, route guides, and the organized preparation of serious athletic instruction, her photos showed an intimate apartment balcony setting with climbing gear positioned near floor-to-ceiling windows, wine glasses on a nearby table, and romantic lighting that had nothing to do with the practical preparation needed for serious outdoor climbing. The whole scene looked more like a carefully staged date night than a therapeutic athletics session designed to help a veteran cope with post-deployment stress. I was sitting in the departure lounge watching my phone light up with notifications from her social media accounts, and the irony wasn't lost on me that she was documenting her evening with Shane while I was literally flying away to start a new life in Denver. The photos showed her hands covered in chalk, laughing as Shane guided her movements on an indoor climbing wall, both of them looking relaxed and intimate in a way that made it obvious these sessions had never been about outdoor therapy or athletic instruction. The romantic lighting, the wine, the close physical contact necessary for climbing guidance, it all painted a picture of two people who were definitely not maintaining appropriate boundaries for someone in a committed relationship with another person. The apartment building security footage, which I later learned about through my buddy Pierce, who knew someone in Shane's building, showed that these private climbing sessions had been happening in Shane's downtown studio apartment, rather than any outdoor location or professional instruction facility. For 8 months, Sierra had been visiting Shane's personal residence for what were essentially private dates disguised as athletic instruction, spending hours alone with her ex-boyfriend in an intimate setting while telling me they were participating in group therapy sessions designed to support his mental health recovery. The level of deception required to maintain this fiction for so long was actually impressive in its thoroughness and attention to detail. Pierce worked at the same gym as Shane, and within a week of my departure, he started hearing stories that made my blood run cold and my decision to leave feel absolutely brilliant. In retrospect, Shane had been bragging to other veterans in their workout group about his climbing student, describing Sierra as this gorgeous woman whose boyfriend was too stupid to realize what was happening right under his nose. He'd been showing photos of their sessions to anyone who would look, images that clearly depicted romantic encounters rather than therapeutic athletic activities. These weren't pictures of innocent climbing instruction, but intimate moments between two people who were obviously involved in something that went far beyond friendship or professional teaching relationships. Shane had been documenting his conquest, collecting evidence of how successfully he'd manipulated both Sierra and me into accepting his elaborate therapeutic fiction. When Sierra's family staged what they called an intervention 2 weeks after my departure, trying to convince me to return and fight for the relationship, I finally revealed the text message. Screenshots that Pierce had forwarded to me from Shane's social media accounts. Shane had posted in a veterans group chat about teaching this gorgeous girl climbing techniques, bragging about how her boyfriend thought they were just practicing knots while he was actually making moves on someone else's girlfriend. The messages were explicit about his intentions and dismissive about the deception they were maintaining, treating my ignorance as a source of entertainment rather than recognizing the cruelty of their elaborate lie. He described Sierra as easy to manipulate, someone who was so desperate for attention and adventure that she'd accept any story that made her feel special and unique. The messages showed no respect for her as a person, only satisfaction at having successfully deceived both of us. Sierra's parents were devastated when they saw the evidence of their daughter's deception, particularly her mother, who had always prided herself on raising children with strong, moral values and respect for commitment. They had been defending Sierra's right to maintain friendships and pursue athletic interests, arguing that I was being controlling and unreasonable in my expectations about appropriate boundaries in relationships. Seeing Shane's actual messages about their climbing sessions, complete with crude jokes about athletic positions and references to rope techniques that were obviously sexual innuendos, forced them to confront the reality that their daughter had been carrying on an emotional and likely physical affair while manipulating everyone around her into supporting her deception. Sierra's father, who had served in Vietnam, was particularly disgusted by Shane's use of veteran status to manipulate sympathy for behavior that violated basic principles of honor and integrity. The most damaging revelation came from Paige, the real climbing instructor at the gym where Sierra claimed to take lessons. Paige revealed that Sierra had actually approached her months earlier, asking detailed questions about climbing terminology and basic safety procedures. Sierra had been researching climbing instruction specifically to make her lies more convincing, learning just enough technical language to fool someone who had never been involved in the sport. Meanwhile, my new life in Denver was exceeding every expectation I'd had when I made that impulsive decision to accept the Mountain State contract while sitting in our kitchen, listening to Sierra's ultimatum about trust and climbing lessons. The company had provided me with a luxury corporate apartment in Lodo, complete with mountain views overlooking the city skyline, modern furnishings that made my Phoenix apartment look like a college dorm room, and amenities that reminded me daily how much my life had improved since leaving behind the drama and deception that had become my normal routine. The 40% salary increase meant I was finally able to save substantial money while also experiencing everything Colorado had to offer, from incredible restaurants to weekend trips exploring different regions of the Rockies, activities that felt like genuine adventures rather than the carefully planned compromises that had characterized my relationship with someone who was secretly spending her energy on another man. My role leading HVAC installations for the casino resort was challenging and rewarding in ways that made me realize how much I'd been undervaluing my own professional capabilities while focused on maintaining a relationship with someone who saw my career primarily as a source of financial stability rather than something worth celebrating. Working with international teams, implementing cutting-edge climate control systems, and managing projects that would shape the Denver skyline gave me a sense of purpose and accomplishment that reminded me who I was when I wasn't constantly wondering whether my girlfriend was being honest about her weekend activities. The technical challenges of high-altitude HVAC systems required expertise that few contractors possessed. The thin air and extreme temperature variations created unique problems that demanded innovative solutions. I found myself developing new installation techniques and efficiency protocols that were getting attention from industry publications. The professional recognition I was receiving from colleagues and clients made it clear that my decision to prioritize my career over a relationship built on deception had been absolutely the right choice for my personal and professional development. Back in Phoenix, however, Sierra was launching what could only be described as a social media warfare campaign designed to rewrite the history of our relationship and paint me as the villain in a story where she was clearly the person who had chosen climbing sessions with her ex-boyfriend over 4 years of commitment and future planning. Her Instagram posts became increasingly dramatic and self-pitying, with carefully curated photos of herself looking contemplative and wounded, accompanied by captions about how some people abandon relationships when things get challenging, how career obsession can destroy even the strongest bonds, and how she was learning to heal from the trauma of being emotionally abandoned by someone she had trusted with her heart. The irony of someone who had been secretly carrying on an affair, accusing me of emotional abandonment, was not lost on our mutual friends, many of whom were beginning to piece together the timeline of her climbing workshops and my sudden departure for Denver. The most revealing aspect of her social media campaign was how it completely avoided any mention of Shane or the climbing sessions that had supposedly been so important to her athletic development and his mental health recovery. 2 years after my departure from Phoenix, the karma that had been slowly building around both Sierra and Shane finally reached its inevitable conclusion in ways that were both satisfying and educational about the long-term consequences of deception and manipulation. Sierra's relationship with Colton, her new personal trainer boyfriend, imploded in spectacular fashion when she discovered that his weekend training sessions with his ex-girlfriend involved the same kind of romantic deception that she'd practiced during her climbing lessons with Shane. The irony of someone who had spent 8 months lying about outdoor therapy sessions being devastated by similar deception from her fitness trainer boyfriend was apparently lost on her, but the emotional and financial consequences were severe enough to completely destabilize the new life she'd been building since my departure for Denver. Colton's fitness business investments turned out to be another layer of deception that demonstrated his complete lack of integrity and financial responsibility, leading to a situation where Sierra found herself legally and financially entangled with someone who had been using her credit cards to fund his lifestyle, while maintaining romantic relationships with multiple women under various pretenses related to personal training and fitness consultation. When Colton disappeared overnight after maxing out her credit cards for what he claimed were essential equipment purchases for their shared fitness business venture, Sierra was left with over $23,000 in debt, no romantic partner, and a ruined credit score that would affect her ability to maintain her lifestyle or even rent a decent apartment without significant financial assistance from her family. The financial devastation was compounded by her loss of the marketing job that had provided the income necessary to maintain her pre-Colton lifestyle, a termination that resulted from poor performance during her emotional spiral following Colton's betrayal and financial theft. According to mutual friends who maintained contact with both of us through social media, Sierra's work performance had declined dramatically during her relationship with Colton, partially due to the distraction of managing what she thought was their shared fitness business, but primarily because of the emotional energy required to maintain the same kind of elaborate deception that she'd previously practiced during her climbing workshops with Shane. Meanwhile, Shane's situation had also deteriorated significantly during the 2 years since our initial encounter, though his decline was more professional than personal and seemed to result from his continued inability to understand appropriate workplace boundaries and social dynamics. Despite his veteran hiring initiative protection, He'd managed to alienate most of his colleagues at the gym through persistent attempts to establish personal relationships that made people uncomfortable, and his reputation as someone who used therapeutic narratives to pursue romantic conquests had evolved into something more. Damaging as people began to understand the actual story behind his climbing instruction claims. Meanwhile, my own life in Colorado had evolved in ways that made Sierra's desperate outreach seem like a message from a completely different universe. One where I was still the same person who would accept elaborate lies about climbing lessons instead of someone who had built a new life based on honesty, professional success, and genuine romantic connection. I'd been promoted to regional operations manager for the entire Southwest Division, a position that came with significant authority over HVAC projects across multiple states and a compensation package that reflected my value to the organization. More importantly, I'd become engaged to Autumn, a sustainable architecture specialist who designed eco-friendly buildings and brought the kind of intellectual partnership and emotional honesty to our relationship that I'd never experienced during my years with someone who was capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions for months at a time. Autumn's reaction to the climbing workshop story was a mixture of amusement and bewilderment, particularly her inability to understand how someone could invest so much creative energy in constructing lies when the same effort could have been directed toward actually building something meaningful with their committed partner. Her perspective on the situation helped me recognize how abnormal the dynamics with Sierra had been and how much energy I'd been wasting trying to maintain a relationship with someone who viewed deception as an acceptable tool for getting what she wanted, rather than recognizing the importance of trust and honesty in building a sustainable future together. When Sierra reached out through a fake LinkedIn profile 2 years later, claiming financial devastation and begging for reconciliation, I politely declined and explained that I was engaged to someone who appreciated honesty and direct communication. Her response revealed the depth of her continued self-deception and inability to take responsibility for the choices that had led to her current situation. Even after 2 years of consequences resulting from her deception, she still viewed herself as the victim of circumstances rather than recognizing her own responsibility for choosing climbing lessons with her ex-boyfriend over her committed relationship. But by then, I was living at 8,000 feet above sea level in a world where the air was clean, the views were spectacular, and the woman I loved had never once lied to me about where she was spending her weekends. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well while watching someone else dig their own grave with the same shovel they used to bury your relationship. The real lesson isn't about punishment or karma. It's about recognizing that people who lie to get what they want will eventually lie to the wrong person, and truth has a way of rising to the surface no matter how deep. You try to bury it,